I'm Leanne Cordisco. Welcome to Our Kitchens. So far in this series, I've been making you a number of savory dishes, which is kind of a surprise because I consider myself a candy maker. So today, I'm going to make for you a chocolate caramel tart, which is a very elegant dessert and can be made in 3 easy steps. The first step is to make a pastry crust, and here's how you do it. Into the bowl of a food processor, add 2 level cups of flour. There's 1. There's 2. We also want to add 1/2 cup of sugar. This can be granulated sugar, it can be powdered sugar, doesn't really matter. Into the food processor. We also want a pinch of salt. I think I have enough salt for the recipe. So now what we want to do is mix these up just for a second or 2, and that mixes the dry ingredients. Next we want to add 1 1/2 sticks of very cold butter, unsalted butter, that's cut into small cubes, which I happen to have right here. In the bowl it goes. Done. Next I want 2 egg yolks. Into the processor they go. I also want just a hint of milk. If you don't have milk, you can use a little bit of water. This is just going to help the dough come together, and this is perhaps about 1, maybe 2 tablespoons. That's it. And we're going to blend this for just 1 or 2 more seconds. Done. Put it out onto the countertop, and then just form it into a ball with your hands. You should feel the dough come together pretty quickly. There's very little moisture in this. It's basically just the butter and that little bit of milk that's holding the dough together. See how after just a few seconds, this has come together pretty nicely into a pastry dough? That's all you really need. You don't have to overwork it. If you do work it a little bit more, no problem. It's pretty forgiving. So, now that I've got my dough together, I'm just going to pick up the little extra pieces that are on the board with the dough itself. Just like that. Wrap it up and refrigerate it for about ½ an hour to an hour. It's time to turn our attention back to the pastry dough. So that's already been chilled. Now it's time to roll it out and put it into our tart shells. Here's my pastry dough ball. You can see it's nice and firm. What I'm going to do is just take a little bit of flour and flour up my board here, my table. I'm going to flour up my hands, and I'm going to cut this into 8 equal pieces. And each one of these pieces is what we're going to use to make the tart shells. I'm only going to do one for you. Push that dough ball down, round it out a little bit, give it a pat. It loves you. You have to show it that you love it. And now just take your rolling pin and start rolling it out. Notice that I'm not using a lot of pressure, and each time I roll it out, I'm giving it a quarter turn. I want to make sure that this dough doesn't stick to the board, so we have an easy time removing it to put it into the tart pan. Take a look at how I'm doing this. I'm starting with my rolling pin in the middle and then pushing out. Starting with the rolling pin in the middle and pushing out. Turning it, just putting the rolling pin in the middle, pushing out, and the same. Because I've got a lot of flour on this board, and because I was turning it as I'm rolling it, this pastry dough should lift pretty easily, but I don't want to break it. So not a bad idea to take a little dough scraper and just give yourself a little helping hand to lift the dough into the little tart shell, like that. Now, This is also a really good tip. You don't want to just push down in the middle. To do this correctly, lift the dough up and place it down. The difference is that you're taking the extra dough from the outside and pushing it into the tart shell. And that's going to give you a nice even layer of dough all the way across the shell. So pick that tart shell up and push it in. And just take your fingers and work your way all around it. Push that dough up against the side of the shell. Now we want to cut this off to have a nice clean edge. Here's how you do it. Hold the back of the tart pan with one hand, take your rolling pin and put it down in the middle and just roll it off the front. And you'll see that that dough clears away. Turn this guy 90 degrees, put your hand on the back and roll the rolling pin off the front again, and the rest of the dough comes away. And what you end up with is a very nice clean tart pan. These little tart pans get baked off in an oven for 10 to 12 minutes at 350 degrees until the edges just start to turn brown. Now, you might have noticed that I didn't put any butter or anything like that in the bottom of the tart pan. There's a lot of butter in this dough, so you really don't need it. It'll come out of this tart pan pretty easily. We're now ready for step 2 of our dessert recipe, and that's making the chocolate caramel sauce. And it begins by preparing our dark chocolate for the sauce. This recipe calls for 8 ounces of dark chocolate, and you can see I've got it broken up pretty finely here. Let me show you on this camera. As well as 1/2 of a stick of unsalted butter. This can be room temperature, doesn't have to be chilled. Now, let me show you a little trick for cutting up chocolate. Here's a block of chocolate. Let me get that out of the way for you. It's best to try to whittle away at the ends of the chocolate rather than trying to cut down the middle of the chocolate. This is a really solid block, and if you try to cut through the middle of this, it's likely that the knife will slip, potentially cutting yourself. So it's easiest if you just try to whittle away at the end of it, almost as if you're trying to make little ribbons of chocolate. And you can see how easily it cuts that way.